What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. In this playlist, we're going to be analyzing Dr. Bart Ehrman's course on Did Jesus Really Exist? Which is basically his case for a historical Jesus, as well as a response to Dr. Richard Carrier's minimal mythicist hypothesis. In this second video, Dr. Carrier and I discuss the primary evidence that Dr. Bart Ehrman uses in order to prove a historical Jesus. He seems to place a heavy emphasis on materials that we can't actually identify as independent or contemporaneous. All Dr. Bart Ehrman seems to do is just proclaim them to be independent and contemporaneous without giving them a further look. If you would like to learn more about Dr. Bart Ehrman's primary sources for a historical Jesus and how those actually failed to be primary sources, then please stay tuned. And that's a pretty good lead in, and I like how you juxtapose like the superhero people from the past that are more than likely mythical versus like more likely historical people, because that's going to be a pretty big factor here in a second. And so this first part right here, I just want to sort of set the stage for everybody to understand where Bart Ehrman is coming from when he analyzes all, the question of whether or not Jesus existed. He considers these to be independent gospels as sources. So Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, Peter, and Thomas. All right. And so the quote down here is, what I'm saying is that they're getting this information from somewhere, unless they're all making it up. If you want to argue that they're all just making everything up, well, okay, you need some evidence for that, because there's very good evidence that they're using sources, because we can tell sometimes what their sources were. And it just strikes me as very odd for somebody to say that Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, Peter, and Thomas are all independent gospel sources. And he makes a very big deal about considering Mark to be really the seed gospel and everything else derives off Mark. And that's a wrong-headed thing to do. And so I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts on both Mark as the seed gospel, thereby, making it to where it's just kind of one gospel source that's not right, even really independent, at least in my analysis of it, considering that it's probably based on Paul.
When you start pulling the threads, this whole architecture, this sort of system of sort of faith doctrine of the field, even if they're not Christians, even if he's not a Christian, secular scholars have this sort of mythology in their head about how this works. And yeah, so like, but when you start pulling away at it, now, which is what happened, right? When I got my postdoc research grant to study the historicity of Jesus and do a study on it, I started pulling the threads and realized this shit falls apart, right? Like this whole idea that these are independent sources, it doesn't hold up. Like it really dissolves fast. Like once you start getting into it. Now it's a complicated story because the scholarship has built a complicated story about how they're supposed to be independent. And it's a really elaborate, convoluted theory about how they have used different sources and what their independencies are and yada, yada. So it takes a lot of work to like open all the doors and see that there's nothing behind them. Right. So that's why it takes time to like unravel this sort of mythology in the field of Jesus studies. I was particularly surprised to see him put Peter on here. He'd never said anything more about the Gospel of Peter, like he never appealed to it. It's weird, super weird for him to even claim that this is evidence for a historical Jesus, because Peter is like, everybody agrees in the field, like every one of his peers agrees that Peter is bullshit, right? Like it's 100% completely made up, and it's a wild exaggeration of the Synoptic Gospels, like. So there's no historian who operates from the assumption that there's anything historical in the Gospel of Peter. So like, why the hell is it on here? He never says. So we never get to learn why he thinks there's anything historical in Peter. That doesn't make any sense. And that's the Gospel of Peter, if people are curious. There's also epistles and other things attributed to Peter, but we're talking about the Gospel of Peter. And then Thomas. Now, Thomas has been a debate in the field for a while as to whether Thomas is independent of the Synoptics or not. Synoptics are the first three, Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And they're called that because they agree verbatim on so much material that we know they're not independent. And But lately, like Goodacre came out with his book on the Gospel of Thomas that I think is just a slam dunk. Like it ends the debate. Like we're done. Let's move on. It conclusively proves that Thomas is derivative of the Synoptics and therefore is not an example of Q. It's not an independent source. None of the stuff that's new in Thomas goes back to Jesus. It's all made up. So there's good, respectable, multiple, and Goodacre's not alone in this. There's several other scholars who agree. So that's a respectable mainstream view, right? And it's really hard to recover from that. Like I can respect him saying he believes he can get historical information out of Thomas. Ehrman never says how he does that, what information he gets out of Thomas, why we should believe that's information that's historical or whatever. Like he never does that. But at least it's like a respectable thing to list. Peter doesn't make any sense on this list. But we can unravel Thomas. We can say, no, there's actually no evidence that it's independent, so you can't treat it as evidence. And then when it gets to Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, Ehrman goes into this whole thing. Well, there's the M source and the L source and the sign source. But he just asserts these things. He doesn't give any evidence. So notice he says here, there's very good evidence. He says very good evidence that they're using sources. He gives no evidence. He just declares that, right? Basically just, no, they, of course, well, it's argument from incredulity. They couldn't possibly have made it all up. That's basically his argument. It's not evidence. It's a bad argument too, but it's also not evidence. That's just your opinion. It's like your opinion, man, right? Like that's not, it's not evidence, even evidence, much less very good evidence. And then he says, like, well, then you need some evidence for them being fabricators. And it's like, oh my God, like the field is full, chock full of evidence, like tons of peer-reviewed evidence that they're making stuff up almost all the time. And I think pretty much Ehrman himself says this, right? Like in any other context, he would admit like 90, maybe 80%. I don't know what percentage he would say, but I would say he would say at least 80% of Mark is made up. Like I would say he would agree with, and Matthew and Luke and all this. I'm sure he would say that if you cornered him, right? At least 80%. But if at least 80% is bogus, made up, well, now you've established that they make stuff up. So anything else, the other 20%, if you don't have evidence one way or the other, whether it's made up or not, well, the prior probability that it is also made up is 80%. That's how probability works, right? Like you've established that they normally, usually, to a rate of 8 to 10 or 8 over 10, they are making stuff up. So if you have a case, other pericopes where you're not sure if they're making up or not, well, you have to go with the trend, and the trend is 8 to 10, right? Like 8 over 10. So so you're done, right? Like you can't do it. So you need evidence to extract things. To say that something is historical, you have to have evidence. You cannot presume that there's historical stuff in here. And so that's the thing. That's why the burden is on him to do this. And then he never presents any evidence. Like I thought it was weird that in both hours, he never talked about the criteria. Like the method of criteria has been so thoroughly trashed in his own field. Like his own peers have completely fucking nuked it. If you read all the studies, literally all the studies of it, they're all negative. These criteria are shit. They don't work. So I've been saying that too. I've been reminding him, hey, your own peers have said this stuff isn't, I cite all of them, and so it is interesting to see that he abandons it. He did not even mention the method of criteria. He did not defend it anywhere in the 2 hours. I don't know if that means he's abandoned it or he thought he didn't have time to defend it in this thing, but that's the only way to get evidence. Something like that is the only way to get evidence out of these gospels. So when he says that we have very good evidence that they're using sources, like he never discusses that so-called very good evidence. So I don't know what he means. I don't know what he thinks that evidence is. Whereas, I have 100 pages in my, on the historicity of Jesus, the formal study, 100 pages of evidence that they make stuff up. So more than 80%. Anyway, that kind of irked me. It seemed like he stepped out of a time machine from like 30 years ago and like, didn't even know about the last 30, like even his own scholarship of the last 30 years didn't even know about it. Like a young Bart Ehrman came through, doesn't realize that he wrote things refuting himself in the intervening 30 years and then taught this course, right? It's like, no, we know they make stuff up. We know they make stuff up all the time. We know all these guys make stuff up. So it doesn't make any sense to say that they wouldn't, right? Like that's just not a logical argument.
Well, for me, as far as like understanding like how the Gospels were most likely written, the fact that they were written in Greek and as far as I understand it, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Richard, but in order to write in Greek the way that the Gospels were originally written, you had to attend like pagan schools and all that. And one of the ways in which they were taught to write Greek is by taking older myths, rewriting them, and creating new stories, essentially making things up. So, I mean, what I feel like it becomes is this claim that, oh yes, these people that went to pagan schools that were taught to write in Greek by making shit up, copying and changing information from old myths and creating new information and new myths in order to learn how to write in Greek, definitely didn't make shit up and fabricate things. Like, I mean, is there anything wrong with that kind of assessment?
No, that's 100% correct. By the way, I studied under Raffaella Cribiori at Columbia University, and she's one of the leading experts in ancient education. So, like, I actually took a graduate level course in ancient education, and my dissertation advisor was William Harris, who wrote the definitive book on ancient literacy. So like, these are the people I studied under. I know this really well, and everything you said is correct. And I'm not the only one to point this out. Like, there's a lot. I cite the literature. A lot of scholars agree. On the Historicity of Jesus, I have a mention of Creae. You can look in the index at CHREIAE. Sorry, you can look that up, or maybe AI. Anyway, Greek or Latin. But anyway, you look in the index, you can find that, and I cite the scholars on this, which are talking the Creae, or the actual school exercises that are what you're talking about, where this is what they were drilled in all the time, especially at your compositional Greek level, which is kind of grad school, essentially, or at least college level is compositional, which you have to be able to write stories like they do in this. Mm-hmm. And they're taught these things where you say, okay, like a teacher says, okay, Hercules meets a talking rabbit, and you want to teach the moral of friendship. Write a story and use Homer and Euripides as models and merge them. Like, that's what they were being told to do, and then they do this. Like, they were drilled in doing this, right? Like, take models from the past, improve them, take pieces, come up with imaginative fiction to teach a moral to a story. And it's all, and those stories look exactly like this pericopes in the Gospels. Like, they're almost the exact same structure and everything. And the best analysis of this was in Thomas Brody's book, the New Testament. He has a book on the New Testament. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but Thomas Brody's book on the New Testament is about this. Like, the first 40 pages is just about the education system and how it taught this. John Dominic Crossan's book, Power of Parable, talks about this too. Like, this is what they were taught to do. And so, a lot of the stories that have Jesus in them are actually parables. They're just basically fiction that put Jesus in the fiction to teach morals and social values and ideas and things like that. But, and that was just common, right? So there's a lot of scholars who've written on this. It's just the way they wrote. That's the way stories were built back then. To the point that scholars back then who wanted straight history complained that they weren't getting it. Like, a lot of historians were just making shit up, and they were annoyed by this, right? And the fact that they're annoyed by it means that everybody was doing it, right? So it's a common problem. And it was especially a thing in myth writing. So, like, when you look at mythography, Alan Cameron has a good book on Greek mythography. It's all about writing myth in ancient Greek and Roman period. And so he talks about what were these stories like? How were they making them up and things like that? And I don't remember, I don't think he goes much into the New Testament, but if you read that, you realize, like, oh my God, he's practically talking about the New Testament, right? Like, that's exactly what this stuff is. Anyway, yeah, there's tons of, everything you said is absolutely correct. And that's well established. It's like mainstream knowledge now about the ancient world and these writers and so on. Which is why when you see something that looks patently mythical, you need evidence to believe any of it is not made up, because the trend, the standard, what they were taught to do is to just make stuff up, right? And in particular, to make things up for a purpose, right? There's a message, right? There's a inner message, the deeper truth, as you were. And we even have authors like Origen, later, 3rd century Christian scholar Origen, admitting this, saying that, the Gospels are really just allegories to teach deeper truths, but don't tell the poor people this, or else they won't get it and they won't be saved. So we have to tell them it's all literally true. But the upper class people like me, we can tell each other that it's all allegory and we don't have to take it literally. And so and I talk about this in the ancient literalism, the ancient Christian literalism. I have a blog on this where I cite all of this. And so you can see the Origen's just giving away the game, like just sort of admitting this. And so, yeah, that was the norm back then. And you can tell when you look outside the canon, right? So if you look at, there's like 40 plus gospels. We have like fragments or pieces of maybe 10, 15 of them. And, you know, they're all ridiculous, right? Like they just get more and more ridiculous over time. We have something like 30 acts, like books of Acts of different apostles and heroes and stuff of Christian literature. They're all just fanciful fiction, right? But they help, you know, moral of the story kind of fiction. When you look out, you see like, oh, there's 40 gospels. They're all fiction, but these 4 somehow are not. No, the odds are against you, right? Like you're looking at the whole genre is just making stuff up. The entire genre, dozens of examples is making shit up. Why would you think these 4 are somehow some weird exception to the rule? That doesn't make any sense. You would need evidence to believe that somehow these 4 are special. And why would we believe that? He didn't give any reason to believe that, right? He doesn't even talk about any of the stuff we're talking about now. So he didn't really even pose the problem. Like he didn't even tell the students what the problem is, much less solve that problem. And so he just glided right over it. Like he just made assertions and moved on, basically.
Yeah, I'm starting to realize why he offered this for free. Well,
I heard it was like promo for a pay class that he's doing, like on.
Yeah, he's going to offer it later in October for pay, I believe. Like you can pay to listen to it, but like
right. And I assume that's just presuming historicity and talking about what we can know about Jesus, which is the usual thing, right? I assume that's the upcoming class is not about the historicity of Jesus; it's about the historical Jesus, which are two different questions.
I guess the feeling that I got from what Bart was saying is that this exact class is going to be made widely available in October. So I don't know if he's got another class coming out that's specifically only about the historical Jesus, or if he was only talking about this particular course.
Yeah, I don't know either. So
yeah. So okay. So the next point here is just a quote from him, Bart Ehrman, where he says, "Do they give us historical evidence that Jesus existed?" And he's talking about the Gospels that we just talked about, right? It will. This is a literal transcript from the class. Yeah. So, but it like imagine a big what is it? A SIC, SIC, like out beside this, right? Okay, it will not do to say that we can't use them because they're in the Bible, or we can't use them because they're written by Christians. Every source that talks about something has a vested interest in it. If you threw out every historical source that had a vested interest, you could not do history of any kind. I feel like what this is doing is building a straw man argument, because the minimal mythicist argument isn't that, oh, these are biased sources, so we can't use them. It's that we can't do source criticism on where they get their information, and so we can't trust that they're not just making shit up.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because what he's saying here is correct, absolutely correct. But we've never doubted this, right? Like we've never challenged this. It's absolutely right. Like it doesn't matter if a source is a Christian or not. It doesn't matter if they have bias. We can, we can admit that the bias limits what we can know or what we can trust. But we can still usually get history out of a lot of biased materials. Like Josephus is super biased, and there's a lot of things where historians have pointed out. Where I mentioned Masada and Gamala, where there's historians now who are doubting those stories are true, and that Josephus had a vested interest in inventing them. And there's other examples in Josephus where we have things like that, where we don't trust what he says. But you have to have a reason, and that's what Ehrman's last quote said. Like you should have a reason. To doubt it, right? And so the reason that we doubt the Gospels is twofold. One is the one we mentioned just before, which is they're in the genre of mythography, and mythography is usually made up, right? So this is another example of we're not talking about Socrates, right? We're not talking about Plato and Xenophon writing about Socrates. That's not mythology. It is fiction, by the way. So we do doubt the absolute historicity of those stories. But that's historical fiction, and it's based on eyewitness knowledge, because Plato knew Socrates, Xenophon knew Socrates, and they both had a vested interest in marketing Socrates' ideas. So there's truth in there, but we know they're fiction. And that's because actually Plato says it is in his collection of dialogues. This is in the fiction of, is basically, he's literally telling you he's sort of making these stories up. But they might be based on real stories, that kind of thing, what it's like Lifetime, special movies, based on a true story. So it's like that. But the Gospels are written much more in mythographic mode. They look a lot more like the lives of Aesop or the labors of Hercules or the biography of Romulus. Like they look the kinds of things that usually gets written about fictional people. So that's the first problem, that we can't. It's not because it's the Bible. It's not because it's the Christians. It's because of the genre. And the genre, regardless of whether it's Christian, pagan, whatever, the genre is usually bogus. And we know this from the Old Testament too. Like we Deuteronomy, the whole Pentateuch is agreed to be mythology. So that's, and there's a lot of Jewish literature, like the novels, like Joseph and Asenath and so on, Tobit and so on, that we know are made up. They're just made up stories. And the Gospels fit in that same genre, right? So that they're written in a similar style, etc. So that's the main problem. The second problem is that because of that, you have to find evidence, reason to believe something in there, right? And like you mentioned, that we can't. Like, there's every attempt to do that has failed. And I think that's the thing that he should be teaching is that every attempt, and that's valid to say, like, yeah, there's methods we can use. Historians have methods to get history out of these kinds of texts. That is true. The problem is that none of them have ever worked on the Gospels. And it's not because the Gospels are written by Christians. It's just that we just don't have any success with it. Like, we've never been able to apply any of these things in a logically valid way that gets anything reliable out of the Gospels. We just haven't. And it doesn't matter why. Like, you can come up with excuses as to why that is. So maybe there's tons of history in there. We just can't find it. We just don't have the tools for it. It's like, yeah, but we still don't have it. So you can't argue from it, right? So, like, yeah, absolutely. It's totally possible that there's history in there, but we just don't have any tools that are successful in getting it out of there. So you have both the prior side and you have the actual results side have been both failures. And that's why we can't do the thing that he wants us to be able to do.
Yeah. Do you find normally whenever I encounter this kind of thing where it talks about the validity of the gospel sources or whatnot, I typically try to juxtapose it in a very simple way to Arrian's biography of Alexander the Great, because I feel like that's a great juxtaposition between like a biography where it's one, as far as I understand, it's considered one of the better biographies of Alexander the Great versus what the Gospels give us, because Arrian gives us like an entire section where he discusses his sources, where he gets his information, talking about specific names of people that he gets his information from, even how to resolve contradictions between his sources.
That's right. Yeah.
And
I use this example, right? I use this example in On the Historicity of Jesus, but go ahead and finish.
I was just going to say that I juxtapose Arrian's biography against the Gospels and as a way to really judge like how good are the Gospels as sources, and how can we determine what is historical in the Gospels, because like we can definitely like analyze Arrian's sources and see, oh, these are firsthand accounts that maybe we don't have access to now, but he definitely had access to them. So like, there's like, could he be lying? Yeah, sure. He could be lying, but I mean, we've been able to independently verify that these sources would have existed. So like, there's no reason to doubt.
Yeah, we have independent sources, not just Arrian attesting to the existence of his sources. And also we have corroboration from earlier historians and contemporaries of Alexander too. So you can triangulate enough of this to know that Arrian is not just making it all up. And his practice we can show that his practice is so consistent that even in the parts where we can't corroborate, we have reason to trust that he's at least following his method, which doesn't mean that what he's writing is true. Even he says that his method doesn't necessarily entail what he writes is true. But his method, he says, is like, I looked at these 3 eyewitness sources, because these are people who actually traveled with Alexander and wrote books about their personal experience. These are eyewitness accounts of what happened. And of course, they have biases themselves, right? And they had competing biases as well. So he took the 3 sources, and he says what he did is, everywhere that they agree, I'll just tell the story. And anywhere they disagree, I'll tell you they disagree and what the disagreement is. And we think he's not 100% in this. Like, we think sometimes he maybe skips over some disagreements. But he does it a lot. So he actually says, like he does the one about the Siwa trip, the march through the desert where he was going to go to the oracle at Siwa and, the god of Egypt is going to tell him he's awesome or whatever. And but there's two different versions, and he says, like, in one version they get lost in the desert. All sources agree he gets lost in the desert, and these are eyewitnesses there. And he says one source says that they followed a flock of birds to the oasis, which is actually a sensible thing. If you see birds flying, they're probably in the desert. They're probably going towards water. So that's a believable story. But he says, and he names the other author who says, well, it was a talking horned snake that showed up and told them to follow it. And it's like, okay, which of those stories do you think is true? But and this tells us two things. One is Arrian is very attentive to conflicting accounts. He's attentive to, these are eyewitness accounts. The second thing, which is a methodology that's not in the Gospels. The Gospels don't give a shit. If they contradict something, they don't tell you. They're not going to tell you that they're changing a story. They don't want you to know that they're changing the story. They don't want you to know they're cutting things. That's why they cut things, so that you don't know. So that when they were originally written, when they're put together, it created a problem, or that apologetics then had to solve. But when they first originally come out, they're coming out as competing stories. These are competing narratives. They're trying to win the market for their version of events. But they're not doing what Arrian is doing. They're not telling us who their sources are. They're not telling their eyewitnesses. They're not comparing them and telling us where they disagree. They're not doing any of this stuff. And yet, when we do Arrian, like, he tells us one of these eyewitnesses fucking claimed that there was a talking horned snake. Like, so even eyewitnesses are fucking liars, right? Like, that's the thing, is like he shows that even eyewitnesses' sources are not 100%. But we can still say, like, well, yeah, when you triangulate a variety of sources, et cetera, like, there's things you can use methodologies to come to, like, what probably happened. I think the bird story is probably what happened. So you can get to, like, plausible outcomes that way. We can't do this with the Gospels because we don't have any corroborating external sources. The Gospels don't talk about their methodology, don't talk about their sources. They don't give us anything that we can apply these kinds of criteria to work through them, to even find anything in this that's historical, even if anything is, which is the problem.
Yeah, it seems like Ehrman is primarily just assuming that they're using a source, or and I'm about to bring up a major assumption that I think underlines everything that he says in this first class. But I feel like he's working off of a number of assumptions, and he just ad hoc claims them and without actually substantiating them. Thank you, heathens, for joining me today for my discussion with Dr. Richard Carrier about Dr. Bart Ehrman's class, Did Jesus Really Exist? If you would like to continue this discussion, you can either just stay on this video and wait for the end, or you can click on the video in the end screen here. Otherwise, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. And as always, don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.